Recording in progress.
Oh, you guys are on this too, right? Okay, I guess we're all on this too.
It was just those 5 hemp points, huh?
Huh?
It was just those 5 hemp points. I'm gonna text that to you.
As close as it gets.
Of course.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to ask everyone to mute themselves if that's okay. We do have a good number of people on the call.
Are you doing it without video or with video?
I'm doing it with video, but not.
It's completely up to you if you'd like to do video or not. I don't believe that question was geared towards me, but I'll take the liberty to respond. So again, if you have not muted yourself, if you wouldn't mind just muting yourself, can just out of courtesy for everyone. So we do have a good number of people on the call. So again, let's go ahead and jump right into it. My name is Arnoldo Rodriguez. I'm the city manager here at the city of Madera. I've had the pleasure. Can everyone hear me okay? James, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, if that's okay? Okay, thanks. So this is being recorded and we'll put it online after the meeting. Exactly how we go about that, that's out of my expertise. So I'll have staff do it. So again, Arnoldo Rodriguez, city manager, city of Madera. With me, we have James Troyer, who's one of our planners here at the city. And then we also have David McPherson from HTL. So the purpose of today's meeting is, I understand that not everyone's had the luxury of watching the city go through the process over the past year and a half. So what we wanted to do is provide an overview or an orientation to our process about it. Again, if you're not muted, would you mind please muting yourself? And so we'll so today's we'll get it kicked off. I understand we're probably not going to be able to answer everyone's questions precisely today. If we are not, my ask is that you follow up. Our contact information, and I'm saying our contact information, by that I mean James' contact information is on the city's landing page for this item. And with that, you can reach out to him directly. I'm going to share my screen here. So I'm going to kick it off. And then after that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave and then we can walk through it. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here and then we'll get going. Let me see. So can everyone see my screen okay? And this is the PowerPoint. Okay, so we're good. Harry just told me we're good. So thanks, Harry. So again, so I'm Arnoldo Rodriguez, city manager. Quick overview. We have a total of three permit types here at the city. We have our standard applications for micro businesses. We'll be talking about that today. We have social equity applications. If you're interested in social equity and only in social equity, you're more than welcome to stay on today. However, we have a social equity orientation on Wednesday. I'm sorry, on Thursday. So this would be Thursday, this upcoming Thursday at 1 o'clock. So if you're only interested in social equity, obviously you can attend that meeting, but you're more than welcome to stay on this one. And then we also have our third category of vertically integrated cultivation, distribution, manufacturing, and test labs. And then we also have a category called vertical integration. So if you have a specific question about this, we'll try to provide an overview today. But then again, if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with James from our team. James' contact information, including his email address and his cell phone number or his office number, are on the city's landing page. If you have not received, if you did not directly receive an email from me on Friday, and if you'd like to go on our listserv, please send us an email, and then we'll get you on that listserv. So that's a listserv that we've been developing for about 1.5 years now, people that have reached out. So we share all the information with every person. So if you do have, so if you'd like to get on there, just let us know. So in terms of, again, social equity, I'm not going to get into, but I'm going to go over this table just very briefly. David's probably going to add to it. But in terms of the number of applications, again, today's for standard applications, and then collectively, I'm referring to vertically integrated. But again, that actually is for the cultivation, distribution. Collectively, I'm just referring to it as vertically integrated. So in terms of the process itself, it is a competitive process for standard applications. It's not going to be a competitive process for vertically integrated. So again, if someone is fortunate to receive a vertical permit, that does not preclude anyone else from getting it. So again, you're not competing with one another at all. The best way I can describe it is you're competing against yourself, making sure that you comply with the city's regulations and the states, and then in theory, you would be eligible to receive one so long as you comply. The maximum number of permits for standard retail applications will be 6. For vertically integrated, there is no limit. So again, that's why I said you're not competing against anyone else. So it's not a competition with one another. And again, if you can mute yourself, if you're just joining us, that would be greatly appreciated. In terms of the informational kickoff meeting, that's today. It's happening right now. So thank you for joining us. In terms of criminal background, there is one required for all of them. There's also a zoning verification letter required for all 3 of them as well. And James will be helping the city. That's James Troyer, who's on this call, is going to be assisting the city. We also have a completeness review for all 3 of them. It's pretty standard. We have the scoring applications. This is the same scoring system that was on the email that was delivered to everyone Friday. That's on our landing page at the city's homepage for Cannabis. If you'd like to be on our listserv, again, I'll repeat myself here. Feel free to send us an email and we'll add you to the listserv. The maximum number of points per application, standard applications is 3,000. Vertically integrated is 3,000. The maximum number of points to advance to phase 3 for standard applications is 90 or 2,700 points, 90%. For vertically integrated is 80 or 2,400 points. Again, for vertically integrated, it's not a competitive process. It's making sure that you get that you're scoring enough points. But again, if you're granted one, that doesn't preclude anyone else from getting one. So again, it's not a competition. There is a community meeting component to this, and the purpose of that is making sure that none of us miss something on the application or in the review. Something that sometimes comes up is while we're a city of 65,000 people, that's not to say that we get everything right the first time. This provides an opportunity for the community to provide some feedback. The minimum number, this is not the maximum, this is the minimum number of applications that will advance to phase 4. That for standard applications is 10. For vertically integrated, it's not applicable because again, it's not a competitive process. In terms of the standard application process, the city council is going to have the opportunity to interview all applicants. This is going to be done via public forum. It's going to be a formal process, and that's going to go before the city council, and that's going to be subject to the Brown Act. For vertically integrated, that's not the process. And then for the decision-making body, you do have for standard applications, the city council is going to be the decision-making body. For vertically integrated, it's staff, and staff being technically it would come up to the city manager. However, Obviously, we'll be in close coordination with David from HDL, as long as with James and our police department. And then again, while we're not talking about it today, just in case anyone is hearing about social equity for the first time, we do have Exhibit B, which was attached to the application that's on our landing page. In terms of the fees themselves, there is going to be roughly a $10,500 fee to apply. The fee for review from HDL to the city is $5,900. The city fee is roughly $4,000. The zoning verification letter is $187. The background, which would go through a website to HDL directly, is $300, and then the live scan is $73 for roughly $10,551 per application, and that's the breakdown in terms of how we come up with that. But that just gives everyone just a broad overview. Now, are there going to be a couple of things here and there? I don't want to speculate, but this is what we believe the city application fees will be. And then we have the map as well. So the 600 feet where we attempted to do here, those areas in blues, we try to capture schools, both private and public. I'd like to think we captured all of them, but then again, that's why we go through the process, right, to make sure that we have all of them. This map will be posted on our website. The one thing that I can tell you that's missing on here are daycare centers, not daycare homes. One of the things as we're going through the process, we realize that some of our daycare centers don't have, do not have the luxury of having business licenses. So we're still going through that. So again, so as you're looking at sites, that's something you definitely want to take a look at. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know we're going to have some additional questions. If you'd like to pose them in the chat box, we'll try to get to them. I'm not going to tell you I'm going to get to them today, but we'll try to have an FAQ page on our website as we're going through it. And I'm sure a lot of people here have a lot of questions. There's approximately 60 people. Obviously, we didn't have a log on. We wanted to make it somewhat of an informal item. So again, so my ask is not everyone to begin to unmute themselves to ask questions. We'll try to give everyone time here. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over. Let me turn it over to David, if that's okay. So this is David from HDL. I believe a lot of people on this call probably know David from other communities. And so with that, David, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Arnaldo. Appreciate that. Could I get you to bring the standard app and then kind of scroll down it as I talk? Would be great.
Yeah, David, you're freezing up a little bit. I don't know if that was just on mine or on everyone else's end too. Okay, so David, you were kind of cutting out. So you were asking me to bring up the application?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. You just give me a second here. So let me pull up the application.
Okay. So while Arnaldo's doing that, just to kind of highlight stuff, and again, I'm not going to repeat everything he did, but we'll focus on some things. The first thing is there will be for the standard application, which includes retail or micro business applications, there will only be 6 awarded related to that, which we're calling standard on the procedures or a micro business. So keep in mind on that, that is a competitive process of all the ones that are on here. And as Arnaldo said, that this meeting today, orientation meeting, is going to be recorded. So if you have any colleagues or people that missed this one because it was not mandatory, they can always go back and look at it. If you have questions that you forgot as that we talked about it, you have the ability to go back and review the video to see anything that we talked about or is inconsistent with things that we may either in writing or we say verbally. I also mentioned that we have an email. You can see the email address there. Please be mindful not to send stuff to various staff just because you may have their contact information. That specifically goes to, it helps many things. One, we don't have any emails or information requests get lost anywhere. Plus it's all consolidated in one place. It doesn't get lost in some email spam, in which case something may not get answered. And then James, as he posts stuff, he will be going only to there. And if you send it around to other staff, it may not get responded to in a timely manner. So that'll be important. You can see the dates are on here. We opened last Friday. gave you some time to kind of review the information in case you need to take notes for today's meeting. But it closed on Monday, June 20th. We expanded it out to provide you a little more time to 60 days due to the volume and staff limited resources so that we can get back to you in an appropriate manner. And you also note that it will close at 4 o'clock on that date. And I can't overemphasize that time at 4 o'clock. And we've had, as sure as that I say this, there'll be one of you that'll show up at 4:15 because you got a flat tire, car broke down, something happened, and you're going to spend a whole lot of time and resources in to be told that you cannot submit your application. So we really encourage you to, get it in the day before, get there in the morning. Do not wait for the last minute. Do not wait for the last minute to turn this in. So Bernardo, I see that people are you hearing me okay? I want to make sure that people can hear me okay.
Yeah, we are now. So it cuts off a little bit, but right now you're good. Thank you.
Okay. Let me know if it does. I'll try to reconnect to my other server. So again, that date on the orientation, you can move it up, Bernardo, a little bit to the next page. So again, I can't re-emphasize enough of the time required, when to submit this, because we have run into problems. And as sure enough as I say this, there will still be one of you that will turn it in late. So the next questioning, or the next part of this is the application forms and the requirements. Everything that you need to regarding the forms, the procedures, the municipal code, both the zoning and the regulatory ordinance are all here on this punch list here that you can go to the city's website. As you logged on here, you would have identified in that link that was sent out to most of you that all the information is there. We encourage you to read it, make sure you understand that. If anything is not consistent with it, then you have the opportunity to review that and ask questions on a timely manner for that. The forms, I'm going to go kind of the forms. You see the procedures. Make sure you have the right procedures that you're reading through for what you are applying for. Today we have the standard one, which we're going through first, and then I'll kind of restep a few key things that Bernardo kind of touched upon on the vertically integrated one. And then make sure you have all the forms that are associated with that. So the financial responsibility form, you'll see on there that we need to have at least one individual that signs that, and it must be notarized. The background check portal. The background check portal is on there when we'll talk about more in detail when you get down to there. And then the ownership acknowledgement, which will go into more detail as well. And there's that form. So the amendments to the application, when you turn this application in, it will be looked at for completeness. And if we find something that's missing, there are specific things. For example, you didn't sign something, you left out a date. You put 100 Main Street when it should have been 102 Main Street. It's not consistent with your zoning verification letter of what was approved. Little inconsistencies like that. You may get a cure letter, which will identify those things that need to be looked at and resubmitted to us. All those things are things that are not scored upon. Therefore, they're not as essential as far as the scoring element, but they are essential to your complete application. There are circumstances where you have a section, let's say your security plan, and it's say, for example, it's 35 pages, and all of a sudden page 28 through 31 is missing. We may permit you to or just submit those missing pages, but we are not going to permit you to resubmit the whole thing. You would be limited to what we ask you specifically on there. If you don't get something in and you miss a whole criteria, that criteria just will not be scored. And we've had it on scenarios where, for example, the security plan, somebody downloads everything, but they don't do the security plan, you will just be scored, and that will get the appropriate points of 0 to reflect whatever score you would be on there. The other key thing is that when you're notified, we will be sending an email to the primary person on the application that you have a cure issue, and you will be given 5 days to resubmit that information to the city. After 2 days, oh, the other thing we ask from you is when you get that letter,
And
if you
David,
do get one,
David, can I ask you to pause really quick? There's a few people indicating that they're having issues with the audio. Again, if you're not muted, can you please mute yourself? I know there's a couple of people here. I think they're maybe on a phone. So I actually cannot, I don't have the option of muting. There's like 3 people on a phone. So if you can mute yourself, because it's coming in a little distorted, David.
yeah, I think it's coming from others.
Okay, thank you, David.
There's a sound check there. If everyone can do that, we appreciate it. So back to the curing components. So when we send you, and if we send you a letter, we appreciate if you would recognize the letter and acknowledge the letter, so then we can check you off to make sure that we've covered you. After 2 days, time permits, we will try to reach out to the primary person and say, hey, we sent you a cure letter and we didn't hear, you didn't confirm receipt of it. So we just want to make sure you got it. The city is not obligated to do that, but we recognize that we don't want to disqualify you from not getting an email of a cure letter at 6-7 days later, and you say, I never received it. So we will make that attempt to do that. However, should you not tell us that you got it, or when we reach out to you and tell you, hey, you've got 3 days left, you only have 3 days left. You're still in that 5-day frame of having to move forward to get the information back to us. So it will be very important that you do look at your email if you've got a spam folder or something when we close the process out. And what we will ask the city to do on that, like the listserv, we might advise everyone cure letters were sent out to individuals. Please check your email for that, so at least you have a heads up from a different component of it in which it's there.
David, we did receive a question right now since we're on here. They asked if it was five business days, or is that calendar days? I'm sorry, my screen just went like right here. So it says
It'll be 5 business days. We went it out on a Monday, or whatever day, it would be 5 business days for that. So thanks for asking that, and we will. So just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that little thing. So again, we don't want someone get disqualified because they didn't acknowledge that they had 3 little things to get fixed. It's not the fact that you have cure issues. It's a matter of the fact that you didn't respond to them in a timely manner. So we'll do our best to try to reach out after 2 days to those. Moving to the limitations on page 3. So applicants possessing an ownership interest in 10%. So that threshold's a little lower than the states. So make sure that if you have any owner that's 10% or more, they qualify as you can only turn in 1 retail application. And retail is anything that has retail. So if it's storefront, if it's a micro business, part of that, then you will be limited to 1. Now, on the limitations to, and as we showed you earlier, the business ownership acknowledgement, you will also, every owner over the 10% will be subject to filling that out as well, disclosing that they're adhering to that. So the other thing in here is that the city will only accept a maximum of 2 of any combination of retail or micro businesses or vertically integrated application zoning verification letters for 1 property. So whatever the owner of that property agrees to of negotiating LOIs or agreements, lease agreements, that it will be limited to 2 per property. So the city will accept only 2. So 2 show up and you're the 3rd person there, then that's between you and the property owner of determining on who's going to be the ones that are acceptable to receive, but the city will only acknowledge the first 2 that they receive from that. And then and the importance of that is, so for example, let's say someone's ranked number 2 on the list and someone's number 5 on the list, and the city is doing 6 and 2 of them happen to compete for the same property. council selects one of them, the second one's out. So you need to be mindful of that, that not only if you're competing with another applicant, if you happen to be on that same property and they're both very good applicants that are in the top 6 to be selected, council can't select 2 on the same property. So you could be out by being the second one on that property. Then the city's rights of reservations. A lot of things happen through this process. At any time, the city could postpone, delay, or shut down the process due to any situation that may occur that's beyond their control. Or, you know, we had COVID come up, situations occur where council may just change it up to the time of issuing the permits. So that does happen on occasion and circumstances that may permit that due to issues. Looking at a little lower down, the application submittal requirements. The first thing is the address. You can see where it needs to go to. This can be done in a combination of ways. It has to be a complete package, not partials or piecemeal on there. You need to submit it all. You could walk it in, you can FedEx it, UPS it, any kind of delivery services, but it must be received before 4 o'clock on the date in which it's due. And I will tell you, recently experiences as well for stuff that you try to overnight or get to. You can't rely on FedEx or UPS or overnights, just the way things are during COVID. You know, they may try to attempt, they may bring it at 4:15. They don't have the same kind of requirement that you may have of a time frame. And we've seen overnights take 2 days or 3 days. So you need to be mindful of that as well if you're not going to hand deliver these packages to the city, and make sure you got the right address as well on here. Moving to the next page. Again, this is kind of now a little bit of more detail. I'm going to talk about this a little more when we talk about the flash drive. But you can see all the different areas. So when you go down to pull the forms, you can kind of use this to kind of print it, check it off to make sure you've got each and every one of these in your possession, so you don't accidentally forget a form or not take down a form or follow up on getting a form or information related to it. So kind of use this as your punch list of things to bring to make sure you have them all included in the breakdowns that we'll talk about. And then again, the submittal deadlines. The one you're looking at here is specifically to the standard, which is retail and micro business. With anything retail, this is the deadline for that. And I will mention about the vertical one. I'll kind of talk about that a little more when we get to that one. But this is specifically, so it's important to look at which procedures you're reading of informational things associated with this. They can bring it in before that 4 o'clock timeline. So now let's look at the flash drive content. The second paragraph here, I just want to note where we say shall be limited to 200 pages, and it's specifically to these things. And we're looking at financials or other information that's not specifically on here. There's no limitation on those, and it specifies on that. However, I do want to, you can see on there where it says shall be limited to 200 pages. Otherwise, points will be deducted. So if you end up sending 300 pages or 225 pages for this criteria, you may be subject to deductions associated with not following the instructions, so that everyone's treated fairly related to that. So going to page 5, we'll kind of talk about all these more specifically in the PDF files. So we'll go to page 5. So it'll be critical for you to make sure that when you put the PDFs in these files, that you have the information in these files. And the reason that is that the people that are reviewing this, or so for example, one person that may be looking for completeness of all the files in PDF file 1 is not necessarily the same person that's looking at PDF file number 2, an evaluator of your scored criteria. So they're not going to go fishing in different files for something that should be in a certain category. So if we're reviewing something, and I use the security plan as an example, and they don't see the security plan and they score your thing and you get scored or your score reflects that, and you go, oh, well, we accidentally put it in a different file. Well, they're not going to know that. So that's why it's going to be important for you to make sure that all the score criteria are in PDF file 2 and not in another file. And so on and so forth for the various other things that are more just completeness things versus things that we're looking for the person that's assigned in certain elements of this that's reviewed on that. So make sure it's there. You'll see also there that as we talked about again, the 200 pages associated with the criteria that are in section A through H, and we'll go through the appendix and kind of talk about that, which is at the end of the total procedure manual. So as we move down to the criminal background check, so this is a link that will take you to the HDL portal for your background check and ask you the questions and requirements for the background. This is the preliminary component of this, since we will be getting a high volume, potentially high volume of applicants, that the provisional aspect of this will be done up front. And then the final, those that are selected by the city council after the fact, then it'll be isolated the live scan. You will be notified at some time in the future as you're going through your approval process and doing your CUP or your other requirements in the planning department, that then you might be notified that you need the specifics on who needs to be live scanned at that time, instead of requiring everyone to get it done on the first time. You will see that there's a $300 fee. That's per owner, or each person that you're listing above that 10% interest on the application. So that needs to be reflective in there. And Bernardo, if you can bring up the application, the form for standard.
Yeah, just give me a little bit here. I'm waiting on
Not a problem. Okay.
this is social equity. Let me bring up the other one, David. Here you go, David.
There we go. So if you can go to the very end where it shows the list of background, it's one of the last pages.
It's this one right here.
Yep. Okay. You stay at the top, on the top of that. So you will see on here that a lot of questions are asked about, well, we've got 20 owners that own 5% or whatever, right? So we don't need them, but this does have to add up to 100%. So let's say, for example, you're a publicly traded company, or you're even a company that has multiple owners that are under 10%. So let's say you had 4 owners that own 20%, and then you had 10 owners that had less than 10%, but equals that 20%. What you need to do is list the 4 owners or whoever is 10% or more, and then everyone else that equals that differential. So let's say those 4 owners equal 80%. You go, okay, I got 10 people that own 20%. Then what you would do on the bottom of this, you would note, say, there are 10 owners that own a total of 20%, so that we know that there's 100%, rolls up to 100%, but you identified those 10 other owners that make up 20% total. So they could be 2, 2, 2, 2, 5, 4, 3, whatever, but we don't necessarily need you to list them, because one, they're not required to identify themselves specifically, and they're not also required to be background, right? So you don't need anyone under 10% to be background, but we do want you to identify how you get up to 100%. So you should always end up with 100% total no matter what. If you're a publicly traded company, you may have 4 individuals that own 40%, and then you may say there are 3,000 people that own the remaining, under 10%. But this kind of gives you, like, I created a little example here, because so you can kind of see how it rose up, since we were getting a variety of questions associated depending on your makeup. We just wanted to make sure, but we also didn't want it to be less than 100%. It does need to add up to 100%. If you have any questions on it as we move, as you go through that or identify how you're going to catch that up, feel free to reach out to us on that.
And David, so I did get a question on going back to the background where we're at right now. So the
Okay.
question is, can we touch on the background check to HDL? Is it $300 per owner or per application?
Per owner, it's per owner. So when you look at the fee section, but to clarify that to you just directly is, yes, it's $300 per owner. In the fee section, it says here per site in the background check fee of $300. But it is per owner. It doesn't say specifically there, so it's per owner.
Thanks, David.
And when you get to the website, it will specifically say that as well, because you have to do them individually, right? You'll fill out all in your John Doe, fill out all their information of that, you make the payment, it'll give you a receipt, and it's the receipt that you get that will end up being one of the documents that you put on there. Then your next owner would go on and do that. So that, again, everyone over 10% is subject to doing the background requirement. So thank you for that question, because the fee doesn't say per owner, it just says check fee of $300. Okay, so the next one is the zoning verification letters. As we mentioned earlier, the city is only going to accept up to 2 per property. So it will be important for you to identify the property. You'll go in, you'll request a zoning verification letter through the planning department. There is a fee specifically to that associated with that, and that is $187.50, which is under the fees component of there. So if you do a zoning verification on one property and you go, oh, it's told that doesn't work, and you go to another property, it's that fee is per property that you're requesting. Because staff, it's based on the staff's time to research it, make sure it meets all the requirements associated with that, so that it is per property that you submit. So if you're trying to do more than one property, then it's a multiplier of that fee times the number of properties that you're doing that. Since you're taking a lot of staff's time to do that, they need to make sure they're accounted for their burden costs associated with that. I saw also pop up on the live scan, the background is $300, and later down the road, there's that $73 fee for the live scan, which is a fee that the police department will be charging when they actually have to do the back scan, because that's what the DOJ and FBI charge them for, their fees associated with those costs through that program. So kind of moving down a little more on that. Again, the fees are, which we just went over. Arnaldo mentioned the $9,991 is for the application. So that's the big fee that has to be submitted. So that fee has to be submitted with the application. You would have already paid for the background fee on the portal. So it's not like you just have to show the receipt in one of those PDF files that instructs you. And you would have already had to pay for the zoning verification letter as you got your zoning verification letter, which then that letter would be put in your package. So the only fee that would be cut in a check at the time of submittal would be the $9,991, and all fees that would have been covered either before, or you'll be instructed for the live scan farther down the road should you be a successful candidate awarded by the council. And then payment must be made by certified check, cashier's check, or money order. There will be no cash or credit cards being charged, and there is no refund. This fee is non-refundable due to the amount of time and resources that will be going into this of completing this process or processing it. So now let's talk about the phases itself. So phase 1 is just the determination and compliance with all the requirements. It's really a complete package of everything we've asked you to turn in. It is not only a complete package, the payments paid, everything in there, I'll put at the same time, reviewed and so forth. As we talked about, there's that curing process that we've already talked about. Once all that is done, it's a complete package. Then it would be moved forward to the evaluators to go into phase 2, which then in this case is all the criteria that is listed, which we'll talk in more detail in the appendix. But as Arnaldo had indicated is that there will be a minimum of 10 applicants. We don't know for the standard or we're going to get 15 applicants or there's going to be 35 applicants or whatever. So based on the quantity and the quality, as council has decided, they didn't want to have a hard knockoff number. Based on the quantity and quality, that may go up in the numbers that will move on to the phase 4 or to phase 3 and phase 4. We don't know what that is yet, but since this is very competitive and it tends to be, scores tend to be very high and tight, then that will be taking consideration of how much that is. But at no time will it be less than 10 unless there's not 10 applicants, 10 qualified applicants that meet that minimum threshold of 90%. And everyone has to be at least 90% to be considered to move forward for consideration, but that number may change. So we're gonna move a little, let's go to phase 3 because we're gonna talk in the appendix about the different category breakdowns. So we'll go to phase 3. So phase 3 is that public meeting. I think Arnaldo did a good job of kind of explaining it. It really is, we've scored everything. One of the things during the deliberation of council was that they wanted the public input, wanted to make sure we weren't circumventing anything through the CUP process, that this gives the public still before a decision is made some input before council makes their final decision. If there's anything that comes a concern, we've had issues where it's, hey, the lighting from this building is flying into residents to, did you know that there's asbestos in that building, or the parking issues? This is a time where it's not the fact that they may or not like, cannabis business. It's more about legitimate concerns that need to be brought to council's attention before they make their final decision. So then they can have them as part of the discussion or the final decision process regarding anything associated with that. And then once that is done, those applicants that were already brought from 2 to phase 3 and are still recommended to move forward, then as it's determined on that number, then they will be brought to the city council for the final interview process. The council will then make their decision associated with everything on here. If you are going to appeal, you're not satisfied or concerned regarding it, read the ordinance regarding the process, but you can only appeal through the hearing officer, phases 1 through 3, because that is more the question before it goes to council and council makes their decision. That decision is final at that point as part of the process. So any appeals need to resolve before it goes to council so that you can still be considering that as well. Okay, so let's move to the appendix. So the first part of this in the appendix, you'll see there's kind of the concern of the California Public Records Act. Everything is subject to disclosure to the public. So if the city is asked to disclose all this information, it will be important to know what is considered confidential or proprietary. Typically, it's financial information or financial records, and anything related specifically to the details of security related issues, where your design or layout associated with all that stuff. But we highly recommend that you put on there confidential proprietary for things that meet that criteria. It doesn't mean that you're putting it on there and it automatically meets that criteria, because it still has to meet the threshold test of this. If we get a public records request from somebody, the city will do their best to notify you so that any action that you wish to take, if you want to get an injunctive order to not have it released, then you would be doing that on your own dime, and would have to meet the deadline before the city is required by law to release this information. Now, typically, one of the questions that come up is you close the process, phase 1, the deadline June for this matter, and all of a sudden within 3 days, there's a public records request to saying, we'd like a copy of all the applications at that time. The city would not release anything until a final decision is made, except for the following: the name of the business, the type of business it was applied for, the location of the business, and the ownership name, right? Those things could be put, and most likely would be on the list in advance so that it's there, but nothing else will be released, so it doesn't become a competitive advantage or disadvantage for anyone that's still through the process until the final decision is made by council. So that'll be limited to the PRA until you get completion of the phase 4. But we still important that you be aware of this requirement that they are required to do, and have some limitations on what they can and cannot do. So now you have the sections that are being scored. And so, as I mentioned to you, this is critical that you make sure everything is on that PDF drive in which it needs to be submitted to for this. So we're talking about PDF file number 2 for the appendix, everything A through H in there. You will notice, as Arnaldo also talked about, the scoring elements. There will be breakdowns associated with the variations of things in here. And I did want to point one thing out that we ran into a little inconsistency on, and that is a micro business. So if you're a retailer and you're only doing retail, obviously you're only being scored on the retail side. If you're a micro business, then you have other elements that are on here. We will post on the site, but for those that are on here, is that we will only be scoring your app. If you apply for a micro business, we will only be scoring for the purposes of the competitive process your retail elements associated. So all the criteria of the retail. So we don't want you to get dinged because you did something on your cultivation or your manufacturing element and it brought your score down, and let's say you lost a point or 2, and all of a sudden you move from 5th place to, or let's say 15th place to number 22, right? Because you got dinged on those. However, you're still required to meet the minimum thresholds of the 80% on that category. Even though it may not reflect of it, you would be advised that your other categories on the micro business need to be mitigated on that. So make sure you meet the minimum score of 80% as a pass or fail, but for the purpose of scoring you and ranking you for the retail, it will only be based on the retail element of a micro business. Okay, and that way no one gets penalized for that aspect of it. So then you see the criteria in the business plan. Most of it is pretty straightforward. We could probably answer specific questions when you ask them, but look at the city's, again, regulatory ordinance and the ordinance for the specific sections that we reference here associated with the retail. And then what we're asking for associate each one of these categories when you fill that out through this process. It's pretty consistent with some of the state requirements, but also what's in the regulation. And you'll see that we cite the section 6.5-40 related to some of the operational components of it. And so I'm not gonna, the other categories that you see here for the cultivation manufacturer, we'll touch upon those when we go over the vertically integrated a little more tied to that. But I did want to emphasize, because I think it's important, as we evaluated that whole issue with the micro business being scored the way we're going to do that. So it does not impact any individual application. There is also a section in here, going to the next section, to the labor equity and diversity plan.
Yeah, and David, if I can just interrupt, for those of you joining us late, if you can please mute yourself. We've had a handful of people join us. So there's about 6 people that I think called in that the system doesn't tell me if you're muted or unmuted. So just please mute yourself. Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. So on the section B, the one thing that I did just want to point out, if you're referencing, I think most of these categories are pretty straightforward, but if you wish to ask questions as we're complete, because the goal really is to make sure we answer all your questions today in the time frame we have. But also I want to point out the item number 8 regarding describe to the extent to which the cannabis business will be a locally owned enterprise and the owner reside in the county of Madera. In order to qualify this criteria, an owner must have lived in the county of Madera for at least 1 year prior to that date, because initially that's when the ordinance was adopted, 1 year from that. So if you are going to claim anything related to that, again, remember, it's the county, not the city. Council took that in consideration, that there are people within the county that are interested, not much so specifically the city of Madera. So they wanted to have a little wider band for the county of Madera. but you do need that time permit if you note that you are a local resident and referencing to that, because also when you interview, you may emphasize that as part of your local ownership component in there. Questions come out, how much is that total score reflective? Council did not direct a specific weight in there, so it would be accordingly to all the categories. It's evaluated for that purpose, but it would not be a significant amount to the degree that would outweigh the 400 points or outweigh it. But there are 8 categories that are going to be weighted and scored appropriately for that. Section C and D are pretty consistent with compliance with some of the state requirements. You will notice that the section related to it, because the Department of Cannabis Control is now, so it does have a different division of which it's related to the criteria in there. So you may want to go get yourself familiar with the Title IV Division 19-1506 on all the requirements and any modifications that were associated with that. And then all the other stuff we have in here associated with the diagrams and the questions that are being asked here. Qualifications of the owners, again, 3 different categories. Focusing a little on each, a little of each becomes critical to the council to making sure that they do have best of breed and some good qualified people that are going to be running in their town to address some of the policy concerns that they've had. That your people know what it's like to run a regulatory, very regulated business and in the city, and that they understand the dynamics of what this is all about. Section F, the neighborhood compatibility. One of the things that we try to do in here is kind of switch a few things so that they're not some of our old processes. For those that have been through that, there was some inconsistency of redundancy what we had in Section F that versus what we had in Section H. So we try to modify those a little bit so that most of the things are in the more specific, but they don't duplicate. If you see something that is duplicated in there, it may be because we're asking for something slightly different. Could be for the outdoor versus the indoor. So if it doesn't make sense to you on here, as we go through this, feel free to ask a question, or also as you're putting it together, you could request a question on the Q&A so that we can respond to it accordingly. And then the community benefit and investment plan, part of this is critical because of what, if you make it to the council, they're very interested in what you're going to provide to the community. And keep in mind that the city already has a tax that I believe we adopted in March or February by resolution by council, locking in at least the initial rate. So if you're interested to know what those are, you know what that are. So the focus really on this is all the other benefits that you have, not necessarily that you're going to pay a fee that because you have a tax. Just be aware in some processes, cities or agencies don't have a tax, and so that the community benefit is kind of built into what you're proposing to them. This is not the case. The city does have a tax, so that needs to reflect that in here. Whatever you put in writing, and it may be provided to the council during their deliberation of the final decision, becomes a condition in terms, not only in here, but in your interview. So if you say something in writing and you say something in your interview, that community benefit agreement that you negotiate, that you execute, it will become a condition in terms of your agreement. So you will be held accountable for that. And it may be also a reason or just cause to revoke your permit should you not comply with that commitment. So just be realistic on what you're asking or providing or telling, both on paper and to the council if you're provide the opportunity to be interviewed. So the other thing here I want to point out in the section F 3C, list all known nearby well-traveled paths to schools and describe how the cannabis business will proactively protect the youth. This was due last year and a half of policy discussion, was something of concern to both community and to some council members specifically. So, if you're in an area that's zoned somewhere around that and you have kids on a path to school 2 years, you may want to make sure you're well defined how you've mitigated or addressed anything associated with that, related to that. Oops, I kind of went backwards then. And then last section, section H, proposed location. Again, a few different things that are looked at there, but also you'll see that we've underlined it. Number 2, the diagram required for this section need not include a description of the building interior, floor plan, or security detail. And the reason we kind of emphasized it here on this was because in the past we would get a lot of questions. Well, you asked for this on the neighbor compatibility and what we're saying, or the construction, or some of the other categories. And we're saying, no, we're saying the opposite. We don't need you to duplicate, to go above 200 pages. Someone read that wrong, and all of a sudden they say, well, I just had to do another 20 pages because you said you needed it here. We're saying you do not need it here. So we've kind of emphasized it to you. So you will see that that's there. See, I'm sorry, the security plan is the example. So that is this. And before we move on to, which will be a little faster, the vertically integrated component on here. No, do you want me to go vertically integrated? We may have redundant questions on it. Quickly go through the vertically first.
Yeah, so let's go through vertically. However, I did get a question specific to retail so far in the chat box saying, is there a distance requirement between cannabis retail businesses? And that's the question.
Sorry, say that again.
Are there distance requirements between retail businesses? So do they have to be separate by 600 feet or 1,000 feet, which is common in some other cities?
No, in some cities they do that because of the numbers, but you probably can answer better. I believe the answer is no.
Yeah, no.
Right? They just have to meet the other sensitive buffers, K through 12, daycare and youth facilities, and that's all was in consideration of that. There was not in between, so you could have 1, 2, in the same strip mall for that matter, if council did approve that. Okay, you want to bring up the
social,
vertically integrated.
yeah, let me do that.
Yep, it's there. We got it. So everything's pretty much the same on this, but as Nardo mentioned, for the purpose of the application, it says vertically integrated, but it really means everything non-retail that's not social equity, right? Social equity, retail, and the standard retail has specific things. Everything else, if you just want to say, hey, I want to do a cultivation in Madera, and that's all you're doing, or micro business, or any of those, it kind of falls in here because it kind of there's no deadline to a degree, which we'll kind of talk about referenced here. You have a lower threshold of requirements for that. And pretty much this application process is what you're saying is you're not doing anything retail at all. If you do anything retail at all, you have to go to the standard procedure or you have to go to the social equity, depending on what criteria you meet. So there's unlimited numbers, right? Why we don't, because it's not competitive, why we kind of don't have a restriction on the numbers, but we will talk about what that means as well. And as mentioned before, for the purpose of specifically for vertical integration, to meet let me backtrack. I said no retail at all for any other activity but vertically integrated. To be vertically integrated does include retail, but it's non-competitive. But there is a higher threshold of entry to get that retail permit. So in the definition is here, we put it up front here. It says vertically integration means a cannabis business that will hold a minimum of 3 non-retail cannabis permits, which includes manufacturing, distribution, and at least 1 cultivation license, which will cultivate at least 20,000 square feet. Emphasis on the 20,000 square feet. So this isn't a micro business, because remember, micro business only can do 10,000 square feet. You have to have a minimum of 20,000 square feet of canopy for this vertically integrated business, along with these other categories, and you must be up and running and operating these 3 functions before you can even open a retail one. Doesn't mean you can't apply for a retail in conjunction with this. It just means don't think that you're going to open the retail and take your sweet time opening the other 3 elements. You have to be up and operating a 20,000 square foot canopy of cultivation site, up and running a manufacturing component, and up and running a distribution before you can even open your doors for a retail if you choose to do retail as part of this process. So I can't overemphasize that because some people think they might try to circumvent that. If you do apply as a vertically integrated business under that definition, then you get to do retail without going through a competitive process because you do this, you met this criteria and you've done it in this lane. The other thing through the process with council is the question of as well, retail might be zoned differently than all these other activities. So council has permitted, so if you wanted to do a manufacturing distribution in your cultivation site in an industrial park, and then you wanted to do your retail location at a zone for retail location, you can do that as one scenario. Or you may find a property that allows you to do everything on one property. So you have one of two options. Just be again mindful, you cannot open that retail under any circumstance until all the other three components are up and running and approved before a retail store will be allowed to be open. Now, the other question came up is, well, do I have to apply for the retail at the same time I do the three vertically integrated? Not necessarily, because there's no timeline on this, except if we do notice you that we're closing the process and you haven't put in and applied for the retail or identified it, then you would run into a little jam if you waited too long. And we'll talk about what that criteria will be. So let's move up. We've already done the orientation. We've already done the orientation discussion. We've already done the forms. All the forms are the same. All the background stuff is the same. Everything is the same on the limitation components on here. But now let's get to the one key element here that we want to talk about, and that's the submittal deadline on page 4, right here. So this is why it says look at this page. So the application period to apply for a vertically integrated business or cultivation, any of these singulars or any combinations of, is open until the city posts on the website that it will be closing in 60 days. The reason for this is that we may, start this process open and there's only 5 vertically integrated or other unlimiteds, or the city may open it from day one, all of a sudden they get 100 of them, right? That's not expected, but we've been surprised more than once. If the city determined that this is exceeding what their expectation was, they may shut it down and say, okay, we're letting you guys all know that we've got way more than we want or need. And so we're going to put you on notice that the process is closing. So they don't want to throw a curveball at you and close it the next day on you when you're in the middle of negotiating, buying property or looking at investors or trying to figure out what to do. They will give you 60 days. And at that 60 days, you're on the clock, which also means if you didn't apply, if you're trying to also have the retail and you haven't identified all that in your application, whatever you turn in, it needs to be complete and together. Because once they do shut that down on that 60th day, you can't come back and add anything at that point. So that's why I say it's important that you be aware of that, depending on the apps. The urgency is based on you and what that comes and impacts to the city associated with this. So very important to be mindful of that and respect to that. So the rest of everything on here is pretty consistent with everything else we've already asked. Just on the appendix, though, as you will see, we didn't talk about the other categories. So all the other categories are still scored. Same thing about the PRA thing, scores. But as Arnaldo provided you at the beginning of this, the threshold of, it was more of a quality control to this is then 80%. So because we're not having to eliminate people and make it competitive to have to leave people out of the process, you just have to have a quality control of 80% of the appendix process, which lowers that threshold of expectations on there. But you will still go through the same kind of components. The only key difference from this on the others is on phase 4 is that this was a big debate at our room, is that the city manager will be making the final decision because it's not competitive. You evaluate your process, I mean, your application, considerations of everything that comes through the public meeting, and you will still have, that's kind of your kind of public interview is your public meeting, is that if nothing in there flags of any concern or to deny it, then if you meet all that criteria and you pass all those tests, then you will be permitted to move forward in the application process with planning in order to continue getting issued a permit. Bernardo, did I leave anything out on that phase 4 for this process? Do you wish to
No, I think it's pretty
elaborate
straightforward.
on?
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty straightforward. I think individuals that if for any reason anyone's denied, you have an opportunity to appeal it. Besides that, I think it's fairly self-explanatory.
Okay. So at this time, I think we're going to open things up to questions. We want to make sure that we have them, and it looks like we do have some. I don't know if we've gotten to all the ones yet. I don't think we did in the queue or not. So do we want to start with, people asking questions first and then go what's in the queue, or?
Yeah. Before we do that, David, I've been trying to answer some of the questions as we're coming along, but one thing that did come up just a short time ago is, could I share the tax rate for the various application types? And this is the tax rate. David, you're more of a subject matter expert than I am. Would you like to go over them? If you recall, council approved the recommended rate here.
Yeah, so it is what it is. So for each type of the categories is the cultivation is on a square footage, and everything else is on a gross receipt. Those are the rates the council wanted to recommend as a starting point, which is adopted in the resolution. The only exception to that is, which would be an administrative ruling, is if you're a micro business. So if you, or a business that sells partially wholesale and partially retail. So that obviously if you had a cultivation site and a micro business or vertically integrated business, no matter where the product goes, if you're selling it through a retail of your own business, then the tax would be on the retail. If it's going to wholesale because you're kind of splitting partial of each, then it's a matter of that entry point, which will qualify on these. If you don't have a retail or another element of the business and not selling it to yourself for your own businesses, then the square footage would be the tax rate that would be applicable if you're not vertically or a micro business. That was adopted here.
Yeah, thanks, David. Besides that, I've been attempting to answer some of the questions as they're coming up. The one question that I'm gonna have to defer to you, David, is from Ellen. Is Ellen on the call? Because Ellen, you can probably ask your question better than how I can explain it. Ellen?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Yeah, would you mind asking David your question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, my question was specific to two criteria on the evaluation criteria. It's what is the difference between identifying the number of point of sales terminals to be used when the business is at full capacity and the difference between the customer count? So why is HDL or the city asking for both of those questions? We just want to make sure we answer them fully, if that makes sense.
So PS as far as just, has to do with a combination of coverage, right? You have people backed up in the retail area or outside because you don't have appropriate number of POS systems. And then the customer count is going to reflect that, right? So if you get 500 people a day and you tell us you have one POS system, that's problematic. And how everything else you address the security, your SOPs, your safety issues, your cash handling, a variety of those things have a reflection on that. So we wanted to just make sure that it's consistent with what you're saying, that on all those touching points.
Okay, so it's just making sure that that we know what we're talking about, so that there's the POS system balances with how many customers we expect to have.
Correct. Part safety, part POS, proper resources, and it's consistent with what you're telling us on your projections of revenue. Kind of a ripple effect, all those categories of why they kind of complement each other.
Understood. Thank you.
Dave, if I may.
Yes, so we got Matt Eaton on from our team. So Matt's going to share some comments too.
Just a point of clarification, we will not be awarding additional points because we like the number of POS location or numbers or numbers of visitors per day. As Dave said, we want that to see that information to make sure that all of it is consistent. However, there could be point deductions if you say somewhere in your application that you're going to have 2 POS locations and 2 salespersons, but somewhere else in your application, maybe your security, you say you have 10 POS locations and 10 salespersons. If there's a conflicting information or data that is some problematic, then there could be a point deduction there. But additional points will not be awarded for people that propose more POS locations or more visitors per day.
Hey, Matt?
I think at this point, so to just cover the group and before we'll probably start losing a couple of people here and there. We will put up the sales tax information. We'll add a link to the city's landing page. And so we'll put that on there. So in case you missed it, you don't have to memorize it. We'll put that right on the landing page. And we'll also put a copy of today's PowerPoint, the one that I did at the very beginning. We'll put that on the page too. If you have other questions, obviously feel free to reach out to James. If you are not on the listserv, and how you'll know if you're on the listserv or not is if you received an email from me on Friday regarding this meeting, you're on the city's listserv. If you did not receive it directly from me, if it was forwarded to you and you would like to be added to the listserv, I'm going to add my email address to the chat box right now. Feel free to email me just to be added to the listserv. But if you have questions regarding cannabis, reach out to James, who's on this call. His contact information is on the city's website. So again, so listserv only. I'll add my name, cannabis related. Reach out to James. So with that, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try to get to everyone as best we can.
No, there is a few questions that we didn't touch that's on the people had added on the chat. So, because they're important to us. Is there a form for the zoning verification letter? Yes, there is. When you contact the staff, they will have a form that would be filled out. So that was one question. And then business days, you already answered. No send request to James. It is, how does the applicant pay the fees for the zoning verification letter? So you would probably have to mail it, or on a timely part, you can either come in and do it or mail it if you're not in the area. So it's just a matter of getting the form and then submitting it with payment, either in person or by mail to the address that's listed on that's just a matter of where you are. Keep in mind that zoning verification letter doesn't happen right there at the counter. It could take up to 10 days. And the farther you wait to the end, it gets a little compressed on you. So keep that in mind related to that. And we answered that one. You mentioned the daycare. You answered the zoning vacation again. Be able to submit a REIT applicant as a general applicant or social equity. So the social equity applicant, so you know that when we have this on Thursday, we'll talk more detail. But if you do not qualify as a social equity applicant, that's why we have the 1A, 1B. That way you can jump over into the other process if you wish to still do so. So we'll go into more detail that on Thursday. We listed the tax rates and models. We answered that one already. Payment on the zoning letter still. James' email. James' email is already there. So that covers all the questions that I see in the chat.
Yeah, so the only question that's kind of come up is we did have a question on here. Are there going to be local points awarded for local owners / applicants? If so, how many points? You touched on that a little bit when you were talking about there's 8 categories.
Yeah, there's 8 categories in the appendix, and it's under the labor diversity and exclusion plan. There's number 8 about the local ownership. It's one of 8 categories. It doesn't necessarily weigh more than any one category, but doesn't have a heavy weight in there. And the biggest more or less is how you're trying to convey to council that they may have an interest of the local preference or local ownership more in their final decision process. But it doesn't mean that you're going to get a heavy weight or a deduction associated with that.
Yeah.
Hasn't been determined yet.
Yes, another question that came up is that there are some locations in downtown Madera that do not provide off-street parking. Some of the buildings are relatively old. Some of the community members know. Some of them date back to the 1920s and 1930s, and some of the older parts of the community. We do have a parking district in downtown Madera. Also, we have some regulations that exempt certain buildings that were constructed prior to a certain date. If you have a project specific, or if you have one specific question, feel free to reach out to James directly regarding the parking. Every situation may be a little bit unique just because some of it's going to be specific to the year the building was constructed. Specifically, we have a section in our code, in our parking section, regarding a date of 1978, if memory serves me. That's something that the community may want to take a look at. And again, we do have some parking exemptions for our downtown area, and we have an annual parking assessment. So I would recommend that you reach out to James. Another question that just came up: what does a local ownership percentage need to be to receive full points?
Yeah, so that's, if you look at the business owner acknowledgement form, it reflects that for both social equity and for the ownership, local ownership, that you're acknowledging you meet that criteria, and I believe it's 51% or more, or a combination of. So it could be more than one individual, but the total aggregate of those individuals is 51% or more for either one of those elements in there. So the important part of that is that if you're trying to emphasize local ownership, you know, we've had applicants say, yeah, we're local owners, but only one of them owns 10%, 90% doesn't. So to define that and qualify for that, of anything you saying you're locally owned, you must meet that threshold, and you're acknowledging that you meet that threshold, and you're evidencing that you meet that threshold.
Okay, so to be considered for everyone on the call, are there any other questions from anyone specific to the overall process or the actual point systems from anyone?
We did have one more question come in regarding disqualification with criminal history. So not necessarily, if it's been expunged, it does in consideration. Matt, do you want to touch upon this? If anyone that's will an applicant be disqualified if they have a previous criminal history that has since been expunged, specifically both felonies or reduced to misdemeanors?
Sure. So the background process will adhere to the same state criteria. If the arrest has been expunged and it is not a state disqualifier, it will not be a disqualifier here. I do want to caution failing to disclose an otherwise non-disqualifying arrest or criminal history may be subject to a disqualification, because you would be failing to complete the document and provide accurate information. So be truthful and make sure that you provide all of the detail that is required, because we will see that. Even if it's an expunge, we will see it, we will note it, and we will make sure that it is considered appropriately.
Thank you, Matt.
So we did have another question come in, David. Arrest for conviction, state standard is only conviction.
State standard is, oh, Matt, you want to touch on that again?
We will adhere to the state standard, which is the conviction. The background will ask for all arrest and conviction. You will need to disclose all of that information. If we were to make a determination of a non-passing background, it would be only based off of either your failure to disclose information or a state qualifying conviction or anything additional that the city may have, which I'm not familiar with, but if the city has a specific unique from the state, we would report that back, and that could be considered a disqualifying factor.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? It doesn't appear that there are other questions on here. So again, if on Thursday at 1 o'clock, we are going to have another orientation specific to social equity, if that's what you're interested in. Or if you come up with a question over the next 48 hours and that you want to join us, I'm not too sure how many people will be on that call. That is a separate Zoom link, so please be sure and go back to the email and take a look at that, or go to the application for social equity, and you will see it's a different it's a different Zoom link. So as I'm saying that, I did receive another inquiry. It says, how do we know if there's an unlicensed daycare near our location? Again, I touched on that earlier this afternoon, that we are going through that process. If you have a site-specific question, probably the best thing to do is go on Google Earth. With daycare centers, you can usually see playground equipment. We'll be getting those mapped. As soon as we get those mapped, we'll have them on. However, you may be more expeditious than the city will. So my recommendation is that you take a look at Google and probably do an internet search for daycare centers in the city, because they were not on the map that I provided earlier, because at the time when we mapped them, they were not, for some reason, they weren't coming up on our system. So again, I would say Google, site specific, reach out to James, and we can try to assist as best we can.
And I'll just as a reminder, we're referring to commercial daycares,
Right,
not
right.
residential.
Yeah.
Not residential.
Yeah, thank you. So these are not those that you would find in a traditional single family home or in an apartment. These are daycare centers, not a daycare home. Those are defined by the state of California. So with that, I'm not seeing any other questions, or I don't see any hands up. I just want to thank everyone for taking a little bit of time this afternoon to join us. Again, the deadline is about 50 something days from today. The cutoff is at 4 p.m. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to James. And I'm not too sure if we have anything else. David, do you have anything to add, or James or Matthew, before we sign off?
Nope, I think we covered it. Just feel free to, send in the Q&A to the Madera Cannabis Madera if there is something we missed, or as you go through it. Be patient with us. If we get a lot, within a day or two, we'll try to respond to a response and put them on the Q&A, because we will put them on the Q&A. So that's where you'll keep reverting back to. We'll try to keep that updated as time permits.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Bye.